All right, so 7.4 is on special parallelograms. So everything we're going to talk about today is a parallelogram. It's just also something else. Okay, so we have something called a rhombus. And so a rhombus is a parallelogram. So I always say, like the definition, it's a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. So instead of it being like kind of an oblong, like parallelogram like that, it'll look like a parallelogram, just all 4 sides are congruent. It could also look like a diamond. So there's a few different ways to draw a rhombus. Okay, so since it is a parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent. Well, all 4 sides. Opposite angles are congruent. Diagonals bisect each other. And consecutive angles are supplementary. Everything about a parallelogram is true about a rhombus because it is a parallelogram. It just, all the sides are congruent instead of just opposite sides are congruent. Okay, well, we also have, because of that fact, we have a couple other things that are true also. The diagonals bisect each other, but the diagonals are also perpendicular. Okay, so they bisect and they're perpendicular. Okay, and then also the diagonals bisect opposite angles. So I'm going to draw this kind of, that's a little bit too far. Draw this a little bit bigger to illustrate. Okay, so all 4 sides congruent. So what does that last one mean? Okay, so I have these diagonals. So first thing, it's perpendicular there. That's really bad. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 angles created. Okay, so diagonals bisect opposite angles. So what ends up happening is that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. Angle 5 is congruent to angle 6. And angle 7 is congruent to angle 8. They bisect those angles. Okay, now I grouped these together for a reason. So if it's a parallelogram, opposite angles are congruent. So whatever that angle is, like 1 and 2 combined, 60 degrees, whatever. Well, 5 and 6 combined are the same thing. Okay, so all of these have the same angle. So if angle 1 was 30 degrees, then angle 2 is 30 degrees, angle 5 is 30 degrees, angle 6 is 30 degrees. Okay, and then all of these have the same angle. Okay, so if 8 was 55 degrees, then 7 is 55 degrees, and 3 is 55 degrees, and 4 is 55 degrees. Okay, they're never, on a rhombus, they're never all the same. So all 8 of them will never be the same. But the ones on the, along the same diagonal, so 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 are on that same diagonal, all 4 of those will be the same. And then same thing with the other one. Okay, so you can see, maybe you can, hopefully you can. We have 4 triangles on the inside. So that means I might use in each of those triangles that all 3 angles add up to 180. So basically, if you are told one of those 8 angles, you can figure out everything else. Okay, because you know that it's 90 degrees in the middle because it's perpendicular. So you have 90 degrees on all 4 of those angles in the middle. And then if you're just told one of the other ones, so if I'm told angle 4 is 60 degrees, then I can do 60 plus 4, or 60 plus 90 in the middle, and then I can do minus 180 to figure out angle 5, and I'll have all of them. Because remember, if angle 4 is 60, then 3 and 7 and 8 are 60. And then what would actually end up happening is angle 5 would be 30, 6 would be 30, 1 would be 30, 2 would be 30. Okay, so 6 things we know about a rhombus. All the parallelogram stuff, opposite sides congruent, opposite angles congruent, diagonals bisect each other, consecutive angles are supplementary, and then we add diagonals are perpendicular and diagonals bisect opposite angles. Okay, so a lot of stuff that we know about a rhombus. All right, diagonals are perpendicular, diagonals bisect opposite angles. The next special one that we want to talk about is a rectangle. We know about a rectangle. So a rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. Excuse me. So if we draw a rectangle, typically, we just kind of go, oh, that's a rectangle. Yeah, well, opposite sides are congruent. Opposite angles, well, yeah, they're 90 are congruent. Diagonals bisect each other. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Yeah, 90 plus 90 is 180. Okay, so we got all those things. Okay, and then we're going to add something else. The diagonals are congruent. Okay, so not only do they bisect each other, so I'm going to draw a separate picture to kind of illustrate something. Okay, so if they bisect each other, so those little parts are going to be congruent, but if both of them are congruent, well then those have to be the same also. So if the length of the diagonals are the same and they're bisected, well, if you cut 10 in half, you get 5 and 5. If you cut 10 in half, you get 5 and 5. You're going to have the same on all of them. Okay, so which makes congruent triangles on opposite sides. So this one on the left and the one on the right are congruent. One on the top and one on the bottom are congruent. So that may come into play in different parts. All right. So then last, we have a square. And the definition of a square, like in terms of what we're doing right now, it's a parallelogram. It's a rhombus, because all the sides are the same. And it's a rectangle, because it has 4 right angles. Okay, so it's everything that we talked about is true. Okay, so we have this kind of like a little like chart. We have a parallelogram that we started to talk about, and then we said, well, we could go over here and we have a rhombus, or we could go over here and we can have a rectangle. So a rectangle is not a rhombus is not a rectangle. There's separate like things. You know, a rhombus has all sides congruent and the angles could be different, and the rectangle has opposite sides congruent but it has 4 right angles, so they're not connected at all. But everything that's true about a parallelogram is true about a rhombus, and everything that's true about a parallelogram is true with a rectangle. Okay, so those 4 ideas, I've said it a bunch on this video. Opposite sides congruent, opposite angles congruent, diagonals bisect each other, consecutive angles are supplementary. And then rectangle, diagonals are congruent. Rhombus, diagonals are perpendicular. Excuse me, and diagonals bisect opposite angles. Then we kind of come back and we have a square. So a square is a rectangle and is a parallelogram. A square is a rhombus, which is also a parallelogram. So everything we know combined all together is true in a square. The square is the most detailed quadrilateral that we can have. All 4 sides are congruent, all the angles are right angles, you know, all the stuff that we listed is true. A rhombus is a little less detailed because it doesn't have the 4 right angles. A parallelogram is less detailed than that. It doesn't have all 4 sides congruent. Okay, so a rectangle is a little less detailed than a square because the sides aren't the same length. Their opposite sides are congruent, but not all 4. And then back to parallelogram, we don't have right angles. Okay, so those pieces of information are going to be really important that you memorize. Okay, I'll say it one last time. Parallelogram, opposite sides congruent, opposite angles congruent, diagonals bisect each other, consecutive angles are supplementary. Then if you have a rhombus, if you have a rectangle, diagonals are congruent. A square, all of it. Okay, so the problems today aren't like super difficult. You know, there's a couple on a rectangle and it says diagonal this equals this and diagonal that equals that. Make the 2 things equal, solve an equation. So none of the problems, in my opinion anyway, hopefully I'm right, and hopefully you agree rather, are super like crazy. But okay, so memorize all those stuff, super important. Memorize those pieces of information. Okay, all right, so quiz tomorrow. Go back and review. I know we had a week off just a little bit ago, but go back and review all your stuff. I kind of did just right now, but and then yeah, just make sure on Canvas you're going to need to know the area of a parallelogram. It's base times height, and I give you that formula on Canvas, so make sure you pay attention to that also. Okay, have a great day, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.